Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode on the Lunar Nation podcast. My name is Frans, your host today, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts Sagun and Arrow with another topic. We've recently covered the current state of the market and the possible recession that we might be heading towards in previous episodes. However, recessions aren't a new occurrence, and we've always bounced back. But history has a tendency to repeat itself, and we will look into another major impact of the Great Depression that has occurred almost a century ago, and if a similar event will transpire in the near future. During the 1920s, the US stock market underwent rapid expansion, with its peak reaching at August 1929. By then, production had already declined and unemployment had risen, leaving stocks in great excess of their real value. In the aftermath of Black Tuesday, America and the rest of the industrialized world spiraled downward into the Great Depression, the deepest and longest lasting economic downturn in the history of the Western world. Among the other causes of the market collapse were low wages, the increase of debt, struggling agriculture sector, and the excess of large bank loans that could not be liquidated. So as you can see, we're going to be talking about the Great Depression, and I'm sure pretty much everyone knows a little bit about depression or has heard of it, whether you learned it in school if you were paying attention, or you've seen documentaries about it, or learn it on your own. Everyone has heard about it or has a general idea what it is and what occurred. So today, me, Arrow, and Sagun are going to be talking about the reasons for the crash, what led up to it, what kind of effects it had on it, and if this could possibly occur again in the near future, similarly to that it happened back then in the 1900s, or if it could be different or whatnot. So I wanted to start off with either Arrow or Sagun and see your opinions on what was the cause of it, or anything that you want to start off with in regards to the Great Depression.
Yeah. So here's the situation. The Great Depression and short term is basically a time. It started in 1929 and then it lasted until 1939. 10 years of industrial downturn. It was actually listed as the world worst economic downturn in the history of the industrial world.
Yeah, for sure. And then also I want to add as in the current state of the market right now, right? I mean, we were seeing all these stocks and like crypto going down. At that time in the Great Depression between 1929 to 1933, the stock market actually lost 90% of its value. So this is why it was a huge crisis. It was a huge crisis to the point that there's so many businesses that were out, so many people losing jobs. It was really hard to even maintain a even a decent life during that stage.
Right, right. So I think we can all agree that it was, obviously it's not called the Great Depression for no reason. It was a massive crisis during that time, and a lot of people were affected. Now, what I wanted to start off with is that the fact that a lot of people associate the start of the Great Depression with the stock market, especially the Black Thursday and Black Tuesday occurring in, I believe it was October of 1929, when
Yep.
they saw massive, sell offs during those days. I believe actually Thursday the 24th, which was called Black Thursday, they saw almost 13 million trades and sell offs occurring during that day. And then 5 days later, on Tuesday the 29th, they saw almost 16 million trades during that day. So again,
What?
those were some of the worst days of the stock market in that time. But I wanted to start off that those were actually, I mean, that led, that had some effect to the Great Depression, but it's not really what caused, the Great Depression. So I wanted to stem back a little bit before that. So while the United States in the 1920s, in the beginning 1920s, they had, a rapid expansion, their economy was doing great. On the other side of the world, in Europe, it was not so great. So by that time, World War One had ended. There was a lot of, reconstruction being done in Europe. A lot of, what hate was going on between like the French, with the French British against Germany, a lot of animosity. And what had happened is, after the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was forced to pay, it was $33 billion in reparations to England and France, majority, and then some other European countries. And also, England and France had to pay back the US around $10 billion in supplies. Now, what experts say is what led to what was like the biggest leading factor to the Great Depression. I'm sorry, not the economic, the Great Depression was a weak banking system. So just to connect how this had a trickle down effect and affected everyone altogether is so Germany had to pay $33 billion in reparations, okay, to a lot of these European nations.
Yeah,
And
Franz, not to
yeah,
cut you off. I want to make sure the audience knows that it is 33 billion at that time, which basically equates to 269 billion as of today's market.
yeah, back then that was a lot of money. I mean, we're talking about nowadays. Companies are dealing in like hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars, but back then that was a lot of money. We're talking, over 100 years ago. So it was a lot of money at that time. So how this all connects is, and it's funny because not a lot of people might have known this, but Germany was taking loans from the American banking system, okay, and was using that money to pay back these European countries. England was paying back, with the money they were getting from Germany, was paying back the United States. However, when the banking system was having these issues because back then there wasn't all these banks were individualized. They were individual institutions. So what happened is, with the market crash and whatever, people started heading to the banks and started withdrawing their money, and the bank was running out of the reserves. And what they had to do, they had to, close everything down. They were forced to face bankruptcy, and a lot of people lost their money. But what that had an impact was overseas, Germany was not getting any money because they were facing their own economic recession, so they weren't able to pay back these European countries such as England and France, and then France wasn't able to pay back United States. So it was a trickle down effect that had these governments owing money to each other and a lot of money being transferred back and forth, but no one was able to pay it back and whatnot. And then also the people individually going to the banking system and trying to withdraw their money, but the bank's not able to pay the people back, which caused a trickle down effect within the population itself, and a lot of people losing their pension, their life savings
Exactly.
and whatnot, and force a lot of people to go into poverty and people committing suicide. So it was a pretty bad time.
Oh
So I
yeah.
know I know a lot of experts. Again, there's a lot of people like putting blame on a lot of different sectors, but I know a lot of people put the blame on the banking system because you know, like I said, a lot of the banks were individualized. So there was smaller banks, a little bit bigger banks. Everyone was individualized, and actually, I think it was within 1930 to 1931, over 2,200 banks had closed because they weren't able to keep themselves afloat. And it was only 1913 that the Federal Reserve was created. So there wasn't, like we're looking at things now where there's a Federal Reserve and there's a lot of laws in place, but back then it was kind of a little bit of a wild, wild west. Things were still new during that time, relatively speaking. So again, I think that led to a big cause of the Great Depression.
Yeah, just to add to your point, Franz, I really like your insight on that. Also, with the banks itself, there was actually more than 1 billion deposit loss. So if you really think about it, 1 billion back then, like a lot of money, as well as in basically 11,000 banks closed as well. I know you said it was a couple thousand, but actually throughout the whole depression itself, 11,000 banks
Oh
closed.
yeah, 100%. I was
So
just speaking for that like that's one
yeah,
specific
yeah,
year when it was bad, but yeah, there was thousands and
yeah, there was
thousands.
there was 11,000, around 11,000 closed, right? So that means that people had no savings. Like they just couldn't do anything. They didn't have a plan B, right? So what happened was that not only that, to put the fuel in the fire, almost, I think it was around 3% the unemployment in 1929, but then in 1933 it led to 25%, which means out of every four people were without a job, without a bank. How do they afford food? How do they do that? It was just tough times.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it was 25%, and some experts even say it was even up to 30%, which again, still is still a lot. And
Yeah, it's a lot.
just real quick, I want to let Arrow take over and speak and have any thoughts that he wants to say. But Sagun, you mentioned that what was lost for the average person or for the people was like $1 billion. Was that
Yeah,
correct?
it was $1 billion in bank deposits because of all these banks that were closed.
Right. So just to give them perspective, back then, the minimum wage was around, I believe, around 35 cents. Don't take me for don't take it for what I'm saying. It could be a little bit lower, a little bit higher, but people were making around $1,300 to $1,500 per year. So accumulated or across people that had deposited their money in the bank, $1 billion was a lot of money for the most part, since most people were only making, let's say, $1,500 a year. So how much of that were they saving after expenses and costs of that nature? So that was a lot of money back then.
Okay. So Franz, when we talked about Germany, how they had to pay, the Treaty of Versailles. I just want to focus more going back to Germany because I had uh, basically some facts to say to the audience. So, Germany basically emerged from World War One with huge debts incurred to finance basically the cost of the war, which lasted about 5 years. I believe World War One was like 5 years. And what happened was the treasury was basically empty, and the currency was losing value, and Germany needed to pay its war debts. And what happened to the Treaty of Versailles was that they had to pay a huge reparation bill imposed by them. I mean, on them. I'm sorry, by the winners of the war, or rather the Allies. So what basically happened is the treaty also deprived Germany of territory, natural resources, and even ships, trains, and factory equipment. So the population was undernourished, and basically it caused um, a lot of like bad uh, deprived citizens, and all these disabled veterans, and all these veterans coming from World War One with the traumatization of what happened, kind of inflated that rhetoric of like being angry at what what happened in the Treaty of Versailles. Hence, that this gets sidetracked, but hence getting causing the World War II. But going back to how the economy of U.S. the Great Depression happened. At that time, I hope I believe one out of every three citizens was working at farms. So there was like a lot of farm labor at that point of time. And what happened was a lot of farmers, they over grew, so they grew more crops than they should have. So it was like the market was already saturated, and then these farmers, they were poor, so they would take these like big debts to just buy the land and fertilize the land and so and so. And when that market crash happened, these farmers were basically becoming more homeless, and hence at the peak of its time, I believe we had 15 million Americans unemployed in the Great Depression, which kind of goes into the factor of the American, um, or our government basically going into investing into like the Hoover Dam. I hope many people know that the Hoover Dam was one of the biggest projects created to create jobs for the needy. And what is funny is the Great Depression ended in 1939. I don't know if anybody knows, but in 1939, you know what happened, right? Can you guess what happened?
It was the start of World War II.
Boom! The military infrastructure, the biggest economy builder. So World War Two started. I mean, as sad as it is, the military industry is the biggest market share, and that was the reason we got out of the Great Depression. As sad as it may be.
Right, right. You did bring up a good point, and I actually liked how you brought up um, the fact of the farmers and the issue that it caused. So, like I mentioned before, um, the Great Depression was a combination of a lot of things. Okay, so I did mention like the issue with the weak banking system and the panic it caused, and obviously we know that it's important. We need money to buy food, goods and all that stuff. And with these banks back then being very weak as far as institutions, and not playing it safe with their money, they just because a fun fact I want, not it's not a fun fact, that's just a fact actually, my bad. It's
Nothing
pretty
fun,
sad.
right?
Not fun, my bad. It's actually pretty sad to know, but I believe I forgot who it was, but they mentioned how banks, if you guys recall, how banks were giving out loans in 2008 that caused to the housing bubble to explode. A lot of these banks were also, not only were they giving out loans to these countries overseas for them to pay their reparations and whatnot, charging them interest, but they were also handing out loans to people in America for them to buy real estate and for stock investments. And obviously they were relying on so much loans that they weren't keeping enough in their reserves. And what happened in 1929 with the stock market crash, a lot of these stocks went down. People were losing money and they weren't able to afford to pay these banks back, obviously, which led to people to panic and go to the banks. Banks had no money, forcing them to close. But to continue on what Arrow mentioned in regards to the farmers, yes, one third of the population worked in the farming or agricultural sector. Now, during World War One, they were booming because they had to produce a lot of food for the soldiers and whatnot. Not only for the soldiers, but also selling it to other countries. Now, these farmers were able to take loans and expand their land, buy new equipment and whatnot. Now, what happened is after that, there was so much supply below demand, it forced farmers to lose money on their goods, and by them losing money on their goods, they weren't able to make payments on time. They weren't able to survive for themselves. So it led to them to foreclose on their property, their equipment, and it was pretty bad. So that was another big thing that led to the blow of the Great Depression.
Okay, so here are some facts about the Great Depression. Did you know that the market between 1929 and 1933 lost 90% of its value? 90%. Kind of reminds me of, right now with the crypto, especially like Lunar, was it Luna? That just tanked the
Yeah,
crypto. You know what I mean? So kind of like we have
yeah.
to be wary of what's going on because I know this guy who invested $300,000 of his money. I don't know why, in the love of God, you would put all of it in one basket, but guess what? He put it on Luna, and now his value is like what, 10,000 or less. He's
No,
lost
bro,
so
it's
much
nothing.
money.
It's
I mean,
nothing. It's not even 10,000. It's
yeah,
almost
whatever it is,
it's
man.
zero. It's zero. It's nothing. It's 0.0001 because
Okay,
Luna's value is as less than a penny.
so that's one fact, 90%, right? Second fact, I believe you mentioned that how many thousand banks were failed? Sagun, you mentioned earlier.
I believe you said it was just over 10,000.
Yeah. So around
11,000.
11,000 to be
11,000.
a little bit more exact. So you know what? When they went like poof, many people that left many people with no savings. So you could imagine how it was like crazy out there. And in 1929, unemployment was like at 3%. In 1933, it was at 25%. So basically, one out of every four people was out of a job. They had no job. When you have no job, humans tend to think abstract things. So I can guarantee you a lot of people are going crazy and thinking of different thoughts. The average family income basically dropped by 40% in the Great Depression.
Okay. I know I like your enthusiasm with the facts, but I feel like I'm gonna spice it up a little bit.
Okay,
So
okay, you go
basically,
spice it up.
another interesting thing is that we didn't cover is the fact that there was a dust bowl that was going on, and no one the thing that I really hate is that no one mentions anything about climate change as well, because at that time there was a lot of droughts. There was a lot of just like the harvesting. It was really impossible to do it because of the weather conditions. So just because of that, it added fuel to the fire. And then guess what? It's already the Great Depression's already there with all the banks, and like we said, right? It just provided even a bigger blow to it. So we can't just focus on the economy side of things, but there's also the agriculture side of things too. That's what
Right.
that's what I want to kind of twist.
Right, 100%. Because so the issues that the farmers had before the Great Depression is that, like I mentioned earlier, is that had a lot of supply and demand was low, which led to prices being slashed and whatnot. But after the Great Depression occurred, then the farmers in the South went through this drought and this dust bowl and whatnot, and they were again losing the farmers that were able to sustain themselves to that point were losing basically their property to the banks because they had to foreclose because they weren't able to grow crops. By them losing crops and animals were dying off, they weren't able to sell anything. And if they weren't able to sell anything, they weren't able to pay the banks back. And they just had to. There was actually
Exactly.
some people. There was actually pictures and some. I think I don't know if they have videos, but I've seen pictures of people literally packing up their stuff on whatever they have. What was it, like a carriage or like a cart? And if they had like a horse, they would just be pulling it away, and it was pretty sad. And that also led to another issue, is because back before the Great Depression started, there was an abundance of food, but not enough people to sell it to. And then when the Dust Bowl happened several years later, it caused kind of like a little bit of a food shortage, and then it made it harder. It made food prices increase because there was little food being grown because of that drought and those animals and crops being killed. That even the people that were able to afford it, it was kind of hurting their pockets because again the prices started to increase, and then also the people that weren't able to afford it made it even worse for them to acquire any sort of food for themselves or their families.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I just want to add a question for you guys. Just because I mean we're stating all these facts, we don't want to overwhelm the audience. We want to get our opinions as well. I was just thinking, like, if you guys were back then in, like, I guess in the Great Depression, like what kind of things would you guys do to tolerate it? This is just like an opinion side of things, because I know, because like I said, right, we're putting so many facts that I think we should connect with our audience in an opinionated level too.
Here's the thing. At that time, it was like labor market. So I think if I was like unemployed at that moment of time, I'll probably go in the government program where they send you off to like big project sites such as like the Hoover Dam, and I'll be involved in the construction of Hoover Dam or any like big infrastructure development that was going at that time. More importantly, if everything all else failed, you have to remember the war efforts. Being
Oh yeah,
I would join the army
soldier
at
boy,
that point.
soldier boy, basically.
There was also people because during that time in the 1920s, there was the prohibition of alcohol. I think it was from like 1920 to 1933.
Yeah,
So I know a lot of people were getting in like I'm not saying it's something I would have done or whatnot, but when people get into desperate times, they take desperate measures, and going into like the legal market of whether it was selling alcohol illegally during that time or weapons or people getting into gangs. I mean, I'm not saying that's something I would have done, but I know people probably got into
they had no
desperate mode.
choice basically, because
Exactly.
it's either that or they feed their, like, they starve.
Exactly. Now, I mean, I'm sure there was what was it, the 25 to 30% was unemployment rate, so a lot of people were unemployed. I mean, there were some people that were employed, but I know some wages were slashed, and people, even though they were making less money than before, they still had to work that job. They couldn't leave it even though they were making less money than before, because it was the only thing that was helping put food on the table and paying whatever bills they had remaining, just to keep the lights on and whatnot. So
Yeah,
again, it was just a tough time. So I mean, people we talk about the unemployment rate, but even the people that were working were making less money than before. So imagine you're working hard, 12 hours a day, manual labor. You're getting a certain amount of dollars before the Great Depression. Okay, that's cool, but if it gets slashed in like by 30, 40, 50% after that, I mean, you're basically almost working for half your value. You're not getting a pay raise. You're probably not even getting benefits, if there were any benefits there at the time. But if there was any, those were probably cut off, and you just have to bite the bullet, because at the end of the day, you were considered blessed to even have a job at that point to provide income for your family and whatnot. So it's just crazy. I mean, I couldn't imagine living in that time. So it's just
exactly, same.
Huh.
Yeah, the times are just, it's too hard, right? Like, you don't even know, like, I wouldn't even know what to do in that situation. I'll probably move to a different country, but even if I did move to a different country, they might have still had the same issues, right? So
yeah. I
I
mean,
don't know.
it was I think a lot of the affected countries were the westernized, the kind of like the industrialized countries, whereas in the other countries that were you know more kind of like third world. I mean, they still have a high poverty rate, but people still get by and they're still living day to day. But I think it was the people in the westernized world that had a lot of money in real estate or good paying jobs, or invest in the stock market or whatnot, or had money in the bank is what really lost it all, because they either lost their jobs, they lost their investments, or they lost their savings in the bank. Or some people lost it all, and that's what caused to high suicide rates. I mean, even people that were before that time, before the Great Depression, they were literally millionaires. There's actually stories of people that were millionaires and owned companies, big companies, and had mansions and whatnot, and they just couldn't fathom losing everything and having to, live on the streets, or staying in lines for soup, or for bread, and they literally off themselves. It's just crazy. People couldn't bear it.
Yeah, not the reality hit at that point in time. So you guys, I wanna go a little bit more back than the Great Depression. You know what was before the Great Depression, right?
Uh,
You, gu-
Honestly, no. I
you guys,
think you're more the
you,
history
you
expert.
guys heard about the Roaring Twenties? I think Franz knows about it a little bit.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Or the Roaring Twenties in the United States.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the Roaring Twenties, it was like all beautiful. Everyone was like having fun,
Oh yeah,
listening
there
to
was great. I
jazz.
mean, people were having fun. There was money being made. There was an economic expansion. So yeah, I mean, the beginning of the 20s for the United States was great.
Which kind of reminds me, tying that back to right now, right? The crypto market. Everyone was going like crazy, like, oh, Dogecoin to the moon, or um, Bitcoin is
Ethereum.
gonna hit 100,000 and this and that. It kind of, as sucky as it may be, I see the same resemblance where everyone's like
Also,
going
stocks
stupid
as well.
crazy.
Stocks as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so like, is what you're saying? Do you think that we're gonna experience a Great Depression, or because I
No, I'm
know
not
we
saying
talked.
that. What I'm thinking is gonna happen is there's all this crypto hype. It's the same thing. Anyway, here's the thing. Anyone who invested all their money like that guy who put 300,000, you're in for a big, big, big fun. You know the old saying, you should never invest all your money in one basket. And guess what? I guess there are people that don't learn this lesson, and history is always repeated. But like Bitcoin, all these like cryptos, I don't know how many of them will survive. But the one mostly, I know for a good fact that most of them will not, and the investors on behind those will definitely lose a lot of money. In some scenarios, mostly lose all their money,
Yeah.
and you could expect a depression within those individuals.
So, I just wanted to add something. It's basically don't put in money that you can't afford to lose. And also, I just want to tie it as well. We did an episode of the podcast, the last episode, and it was about crypto and stocks as well. So, if you guys are really interested in learning about that realm of things, then feel free to please check out the previous episode.
Also, Sagun, so in the Roaring Twenties, consumer spending was like booming. Everyone was buying new clothes. Basically, at that point, I don't know if you guys saw the dances they used to do in the Roaring Twenties. It was kind of weird. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like a really big
The
culture at that.
swing dance, I think it
Yeah, yeah,
was.
swing dance. So good. If you've never seen it, you could always click on
No,
the
no,
YouTube
no.
video.
I've actually done swing dancing, so
Okay,
I can
so
say yeah.
so
So
yeah, the swing dance was like really booming, and the prohibition of alcohol, all of that, right?
Hmm.
But when the depression happened, I tell you what, not that many people bought new clothes, so the consumer spending went down the drain.
Oh, of course. Consumers went down the train, and I don't know if you guys know, but there was tariffs put on imports and whatnot, which raised the prices of goods, which also stagnated trade between other countries. And by imports being stagnated, and not coming in as frequent or as often between these countries, which led to obviously the unemployment issue, and then also price rising and price gougings and whatnot. But you know what? You know what's funny? Or again, it's not funny. I don't know why I keep on saying it. It's pretty
you
messed
think
up.
everything
But
is a joke, don't you,
you
France?
I
gotta
just got used to it. That's it. No, nothing too big.
you gotta use it. But you gotta look at life sometimes and smile, because at the end of the day, what's not in your control, you just gotta move forward and take it with a grain of salt. But what occurred back then, and I'm trying to make a connection. I'm not saying it's going to happen the same way, but like I said, history repeats itself. It might not be the same way, but it has similar patterns. So back then, there was the atrocity of World War One. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of damage was done. Afterwards, the United States had their Roaring Twenties, and then afterwards, they had that major, Great Depression. Not just United States, but around the world. But anyways, United States, we're focusing on that right now. What we happened in our timeline right now is we had COVID occur in 2020, which was like, all pretty big. Everyone was freaking out and whatnot. But then afterwards, with all the stimulus and funds being pumped into the market, a lot of people, what Arrow said, we're spending on money on consumer goods. Just like in the 20s, there was money spent on consumer goods. We saw that in the middle of 2020 and 2021, a lot of people were spending money on consumer goods. They were buying a lot of stuff and whatnot. And now, as we're seeing an incoming recession and high inflation rates, and we also talked about like people resigning from the jobs for for different purposes and whatnot. I'm kind of seeing like a resemblance in that retrospect right there. If you guys can see it as well.
Yeah, so for any of the audience that's interested to know a little bit more about the inflation, we have an episode about the incoming recession and the bear market where we talk about how inflation happened and what we think the future holds. In this episode, what you may call it, the Great Depression is really interesting because I feel like a lot of people forget tend to forget history or don't really care because at that point of time when they were at school, they were probably younger, and when you're younger, you don't really care as much about the reality of the world unless you were hit by some major financial crisis such as the 2008 financial crisis of the housing bubble. Um, I feel like as sad as it may be, every time there's a depression or if there's an economic downturn, the only way the countries get out of it is either through the expansion of its empire or through war. And
So you think there's gonna be World War III or something
well,
that
if
can
a Great Depression happens, here's the thing: when your economy goes down and you absolutely lose everything, at that point you have nothing to lose more, right? You literally lost everything.
yeah.
So what's war gonna do? Oh, you lost everything. Oh, this is. Oh, you know what? Here's the thing: nothing is more scarier than dealing with someone who lost everything and has nothing to lose.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Someone that has nothing to lose is willing to risk it all because they literally have nothing to lose.
Yeah, so will they start nuking each other? That's hopefully
Nah,
not
I
the
mean, I
case.
don't think, I don't think it's gonna go to that extreme, but
Well, Ukraine, Russia is not nukes. It's like more of like territorial expansion.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm
Uh,
saying for the future, right? I'm
but
saying
here's
like
the thing:
what if
if a nuclear bomb goes off, a dust cloud will go like hundreds of miles. I mean, I don't know how deep the atmosphere is, but like tens of miles up, and it will create a black dust cloud,
yeah,
which
but
kind
not
of
not
covers the
it
sun.
won't happen just because of one. It's gonna have to take several dozen, if not, like at least almost 100 to. I mean, probably like a good like 20 to 30, maybe 40. If
Yeah,
you do one, it's not gonna do no, it's not gonna do like that.
mm,
But what's gonna happen is someone's gonna press a button, and then another person will be like, oh, like it's that like what's
it's
that word? You know what I mean? It's like you kind of maybe I'm not using the right analogy or terminology, but it's like when
tic
someone
tac
does
toe.
it.
It's
No,
a
what's I'm trying to think of it. It's like when someone does it. It's like when someone hits you, you want to have that revenge. You want to have that revenge.
oh,
You don't want to be the only. You don't want. It's like if someone slaps you, you don't want to be that person to just take it and then
yeah,
just
be a
be look
man.
like a fool. You want to slap back. You know what I mean? You want to get that revenge, which
hmm.
is a regular human characteristic. So it's like if one country releases it, the other one's going to release it back, and it's going to create a trickle down effect. I don't think it's going to get to that point, but I don't know how we straight went into this topic, but I feel like I don't think there's going to be a Great Depression. I feel like there's going to be some sort of a recession for sure, and it's going to lead to different things that we might not have seen before or whatnot. And I mean, I'm no economist or expert in this, but I think that we can see some definitely interesting impacts in the near future within the coming whether it's 6 months, 18 months, within the year or whatnot. So we will see how things play out. But just to wrap it up, so I know we talked a little bit about the Great Depression and what led to it. The stock market crash of 1929, oversupply and overproduction problems, farming issues, low demand, high unemployment. The banking panic and whatnot, and tariffs. So we just wanted to cover all that in regards to what led. So it was a bunch of things that led to this massive Great Depression. It wasn't just one thing that led to it. And we wanted to show to people it's something that economies all over the world experience, and it's a trickle down effect that we can see not just for one nation, it affects everyone around the globe. But yeah, I mean, if no one has anything else to say, I just wanted to end the podcast right here and tell everyone to make sure you go like, comment, subscribe, rate the show. Be sure if you have any other topics you guys want us to discuss about or give our views or opinions on, make sure to leave it in the comment section. And besides that, we'll see you on another episode. Take care.